I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. All right. Happy Tuesday. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have special guests with me tonight here to talk about a very important topic. We have Jack Hanna and Alfeka Mutardi. And I'm going to let both of you introduce yourself and your organization. So let's go ahead and start with Jack.
Hello, everyone. And Sabrina, thank you so much for having us today. My name is Jack Hanna. I'm a retired attorney of 40 years, originally from Pennsylvania, where I was involved with the Democratic State Committee there for 30 years, having served as its treasurer for 4 years and its chair for 6 months, until 4 years ago when I moved to Portland, Oregon, joined the Democratic Party here. Originally was a Warren supporter, but ended up a Biden delegate to the convention, and I'm on the board for the Coalition of a National Infrastructure Bank. And great to be here.
Awesome. Alfeka?
Great. Thank you very much for having us. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Alfeka Mutardi, and I am a macroeconomist. I worked for 25 years at the International Monetary Fund. Since retiring, I have joined the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, and I'm advising them on a proposal and a bill in Congress to create a national infrastructure bank to improve our nation's infrastructure and rebuild our economy.
Awesome. Thank both of you for coming on. We have a whole presentation prepared here. Before we get started, can you please explain to everyone the difference between a public bank and the current banking system that most of us utilize today?
Great. That's a great question. The public banking system takes care of clients who have deposits with a bank or might take a loan from a bank. And the banking system is what moves money around in the banking system to create investments. Unfortunately, our banking system has not moved in to create investments and investing and financing infrastructure in the public sector. Currently, the way that infrastructure is financed is a little money comes from the federal government. Most of the money comes from budgets of state and local governments who own schools and roads and bridges and things like that. And then there's some public infrastructure that gets financing from bonds from the capital markets. But all of that together has not built our nation's infrastructure. Proof of the pudding is our investments in infrastructure have fallen from 5% of GDP in the 1960s down to 2.4% today. So this National Infrastructure Bank bill would create a public bank to lend just for these infrastructure projects and close this financing gap.
And Sabrina, if I might add, this has been employed by our country in the past 4 times, each time of which it has been successful and made money. The first time it was employed was by Alexander Hamilton, who used it to get the country and all the states out of debt from the Revolutionary War, and then helped fund the canal system that was originally launched in our country. It was used again by John Quincy Adams, doing the same thing, funded the canal system, and also Abraham Lincoln, who used it for the Transcontinental Railroad, and lastly, FDR, who used it for the emergence of our country out of the Great Depression and prepared us for World War II. The bank that last bank, the fourth one, ended in 1956, which was the last time we had a major infrastructure investment in our country, the 1956 Highways Act. So just a little bit of extra history to it. Thanks.
Interesting. All right. So let's go ahead and get into the PowerPoint presentation here. So stop runaway inflation and recession, make America produce again. Which one of you would like to take the lead on this?
So our economy is really in trouble right now. We have a short-term problem, which is high inflation. Everybody knows when they go to the grocery store or the gas station and they try and purchase things, how much prices have increased lately. And in addition to that, we have low growth. And we could have a recession coming because the Federal Reserve is now going to clamp down on the money supply in order to stop this runaway inflation. And if we slip into a recession, it could even bring on a banking crisis as well. But it doesn't have to be this Sophie's choice. Either we have low growth and high inflation, or we slip into a recession. There is a third alternative, and that is to create a national infrastructure bank, which will spend on infrastructure investments and then create more demand in the economy to pull us out of a recession and hire anybody that might become unemployed as a result of a recession. That's the same thing that the Reconstruction Finance Corporation did in the past that Jack was just referring to. So,
awesome.
So if you could go to the next slide. And the other beauty about this bank is it only invests into the real sector. One aspect I forgot to mention about our economy and our banking system is that it has mostly gone to give loans to financialization. That is building derivatives and betting on the stock market and all these things in the financial sector that are not really investing in the real sector. But a national infrastructure bank would direct all of its lending into the real sector, create millions of new great paying jobs, put people into great paying jobs, and then promote our economic growth and economy. So this bill that is now in Congress, H.R. 3339, is called the National Infrastructure Bank Act of 2021. And what it would do would be to create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. And as I said, the reason we need a public bank is the regular banking system is not doing the job. Federal and state and local budgets are not doing the job either. This bank will mobilize and lend into every corner of America and build all those little tiny roads and bridges, schools, hospitals, and everything that we need to have 21st century technology. So currently we have 12 co-sponsors on this bill, and our coalition for a national infrastructure bank is on a drive right now where all of your listeners can help with this drive, which I'll get to at the end of my slide presentation. And that is to contact your members of Congress, see if we could add on more co-sponsors onto this bill and raise it up into the to the attention of congressional leaders, that this is a viable option for building infrastructure and solving our economic woes. So if we could go to the next slide. This is how the bank works, and it actually is constructed just like a commercial bank, even though it's a public bank. It's private. It is capitalized by going to the private sector, who are holding treasuries, which are our previous debt. And these are people that hold these treasuries, could be corporations, private citizens who use them for savings purposes. Ask them would they like to invest into the NIB in exchange for some preferred stock that would pay these investors a little extra. And that extra stream of money would come out of the interest earnings from the NIB's loans. That capitalizes the bank. And then the bank goes on to give out a loan exactly like a commercial bank. Actually, you'd be surprised to know that commercial banks, when they give out a loan, they actually create money because they put a loan on one side of their books and then they create a deposit on the other side of their books. And whenever you create a deposit, you're actually creating money. So when you go in for a car loan, for example, you are adding to the money supply because that loan increases the money supply. And this bank does the same. And then it circulates money through the banking system, just like a commercial bank does as well. So the beauty of the bank is it does not require any new federal spending no new federal taxes, no new federal debt. So guess what? That should appeal to members of Congress who are worried about the debt, or who are worried about spending not being targeted to the areas that it's meant to be targeted to. And this will do both of those: build infrastructure in a targeted way and not create any more federal financing of debt. So, so Jay Taylor, thanks for so much for commenting on this. So, yeah, if we could go to the next slide. So what does the bank cover? Here's what it covers. $5 trillion in infrastructure projects. So where did that whopping big eye-opening number of money come from? Half of the estimation of need for new money came from this American Society of Civil Engineers, who in their report card from last year said that's how much we've accumulated in backlogs of infrastructure that we need to repair, transportation, water systems, and upgrade our electric power grid. But we also need more infrastructure than that, not just what the engineers say is on their cookbook list. We also need high-speed rail all across the country. China has it everywhere. They have built 22,000 miles of high-speed rail in the last 15 years. And guess what? It's super boosted their economy along those high-speed rail lines. It's called their Belt and Road Initiative, and they're using it to make economic inroads into their neighboring countries. We also need broadband everywhere. We need to get our rural areas in America hooked up to the rest of the economy so that they can get teleeducation, telehealth, and have their businesses connected to the rest of the economy. We need affordable housing. Goodness gracious, we have had rental increases in some cities in the last 12 months as high as 30%. A big chunk of our population has become housing insecure. They have no place to live, or they're about to be evicted from their place of, they can't afford to either put food on the table or pay their rent or pay their water bills, which could also get them evicted. So we need absolutely a minimum 7 million new affordable housing units targeted to this segment of the population that needs them the most. That is people whose earnings are below 30% below the average median income in their area. And this bank finances all of that affordable housing. And then we need large-scale water projects to address drought in the Southwest, where we grow half of our nation's food supply. If we don't take care of drought down there, we're going to have higher food prices all across America. We have a picture in our latest newsletter of a poor farmer in California plowing up his organic asparagus because he has no water to irrigate his crops. That's an absolute necessity for us to take care of as well. So if we could go to the next slide.
One thing I want to just mention really quick, for everyone watching, remember that infrastructure bill? This is what I was saying before. Like, if you look at what, and Alfeka just pointed out, even what the engineers suggest still isn't enough. If you looked at what was suggested by the American Society of Civil Engineers, it was more than the amount that was presented in the original infrastructure bill. But the fact that some of these things you can get, done just by having a national infrastructure bank, a public bank, how many people knew about that? I didn't know about that until Roger Meadows reached out to me. So this is really interesting.
And we have had 4 of them in our nation's past, and they have built things like when the last bank, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, would come into a new area and they would build a new industry that was needed for the war effort, for example, a new aluminum plant or a new steel mill. They would build all the schools and affordable housing around that plant because their workers needed a place to live. So they did a whole turnstile development around a new industry and built American manufacturing back up to snuff. We became the American manufacturing warehouse. We were the first in the world in manufacturing. And now we've slipped way down because we've offshored everything. So by building more infrastructure, we'll be able to promote American manufacturing and get people back into manufacturing and great paying jobs. Again, as I said, we want to build affordable housing. This is critical for some 40% of our population that is housing insecure and can't make ends meet. And it's an absolute must. And then we want to well plan it so that we can hook up affordable housing locations with affordable transportation and affordable healthcare systems and schools, better schools. So all of that we can do together as one big holistic process. So if you could go to the next slide. And another aspect of this bank is not only do we want to build infrastructure, not only do we want to build up the economy and raise economic growth, we want to have equitable economic growth. And that means getting into low income communities and areas that programs have not reached so far. So how does the National Infrastructure Bank do that? First of all, it has the scale at $5 trillion in investments to create up to 25 million new great paying jobs. The legislation requires that workers must be paid Davis-Bacon wages. And of course, when they get into these new full-time jobs, they'll have healthcare benefits that they didn't have before. And then a Buy America only provisions for the construction inputs means we'll be creating even more manufacturing jobs. And we want to have fair access to these jobs and to this business. So the legislation requires that minorities and women have access to these jobs, and there's full enforcement to make sure that this happens. And then we want to target a certain share of projects to these low-income communities. We actually, the legislation actually mentions Jim Clyburn's 10-20-30 rule, that 10% of projects will go to areas where 20% of the population has lived below the poverty line for more than 30 years. And we also want to get funds into tribal areas as well. Finally, we have a trust fund organized in the bank. So not only does the bank give out low-cost loans, but any money that's left over after meeting operational expenses will go into this trust fund, and the trust fund can be used to provide grants to areas that can't even afford a low-cost loan. And then we want to build affordable housing, and we want to link it to public transportation. We want to create job training, and we want to have people have the availability to earn while they learn, start on apprentice programs through great unions that provide such training, and all mechanisms to bring our workforce up to a 21st century workforce in great sustaining careers. So finally, how can you help? That's the next slide. If your participants want to help to promote the National Infrastructure Bank, you can call your members of Congress. July 4th is coming up as a holiday, and many members of Congress are out stumping around at picnics and other things like that. And you can catch some of them and tell them you want them to sign on as a co-sponsor and vote for HR 3339, or you can call them directly at the Congress building. And I would also like to point out to your viewers that this Thursday we are having a new coalition Zoom, which anyone is invited to attend. You could go on to our website at nibcoalition.com to register and get a link for the showing, and we'll explain to you how grassroots groups of people have come together in all states: Washington, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. They've gotten legislation passed through their House legislatures, and they've used all those legislatures to go to their members of Congress to ask them to sign on to the bill. And this sort of methodology for promoting a bill from the bottom up is really, really working. So you're all invited. Thank you.
Interesting. We actually have a ballot measure here in Massachusetts that will be on our November ballots for a public bank here in Massachusetts. So more and more word is getting out about this, especially like Roger Meadows has been a big advocate for like public banks. He's educated me a lot, but the word is getting out there. And I think, I appreciate you guys coming on to explain this and talk about this as well. It's really interesting to see how many things can be done with a national public bank. Like, I was not aware of the infrastructure issues until like I received the PowerPoint. And that's when I realized like, whoa, like I didn't realize they could do all of that. So these are things that we really need to be pushing for.
And Jack, I'm sure, has so many ideas to add on as well. Go ahead, Jack.
I just want to add, first of all, Sabrina, a national infrastructure bank will be able to partner with state public banks, and also the efforts that are going on not only in Massachusetts, but New York State, New Jersey, Philadelphia just organized one for the city. New Mexico has an effort. California has already passed legislation. Washington has a bill, and here in Oregon, we're about to launch an effort for Oregon. So, and the idea would be the national bank would partner with the state ones. One of the few things that I want to mention to your viewers is we are in an international economic competition with the world. And at this point in time, our economy has numerous inefficiencies because we've not invested in our infrastructure, which creates the efficiencies that you need to have productivity be successful. Our investment in our infrastructure, as Alfeka mentioned earlier, as far as our gross domestic product is concerned, is 2.4%. European Economic Community, 4.4%. China is 8.4%. We are being out invested as far as our infrastructure is concerned, number one. Number two, we start off already way behind. We have not invested in our infrastructure since the 1950s and 60s, maybe even up into the 70s. So if we're going to win this competition and battle as far as international economy is concerned, economics are concerned, we must have a first-rate infrastructure. And guess what? The European Economic Community and China employs the same technique as this bank. They have copied it from us, and they have been successful in their efforts by employing this economic technique while we languish behind and watch them eat our lunch. This can no longer continue. We have the challenges that you have described in Alfeka as far as broadband is concerned, our greening our economy, having our transportation system electrify, the housing crisis that we have, our water crisis that we have, lead water pipes throughout several cities throughout the country, and the crisis that's emerging more and more so in the Southwest, where we grow half of our food and they don't have enough water for their crops. This is a crisis. Number one, that's the economic piece. Let me just add the political piece. You know, we are in gridlock, and it's going to continue. We have lost our way. We do not have a common vision with regard to our country that we need to find it in order to unify and in order to be successful. A bank that promotes the economic interests of the country, not only in red states, but blue states, not only in urban areas, but rural areas, is a common vision that we can unite behind. This is a bank that doesn't spend your money, this public money. This is a bank that doesn't create debt and doesn't create more taxes. So it solves many of the problems that we face to get us off of dead center and going forward. And it emphasizes job creation. And so it's not money that just goes out the window and is spent once and doesn't have any consequences. You know, each dollar that's spent on these kinds of infrastructure developments produces $3 to $7 or $8 back as far as efficiency is concerned. This helps stimulate the economy and does it in a way that doesn't create inflation. And the reason and why that is the case is it creates economic efficiencies and productivity, which lowers inflation. So this is a panacea for what challenges we face in the future, and I urge everyone to support it. We've been developing a grassroots support throughout the entire country, labor unions, local governments. We have Republicans supporting it. We have Democrats supporting it. People that are not involved with politics like it, and with good reason. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that when we talk about like infrastructure, if we don't fix and improve, and I use both of those because we need to do both. If we don't fix and improve our infrastructure, that is actually going to cost us jobs in the United States. So the American Society of Civil Engineers, they've already warned us about that. So it's really important that we actually do get a handle on that.
Yes, our growth can go backwards. All it's going to take is for the electric grid to go down. Just look what happened in Texas when they had a freeze. And and our grid all nationwide is very, very vulnerable. And that's just one area. A bridge goes down. The one that cracked between Kentucky and Tennessee had to be rerouted, and all those trucks had to go around a different way. And that just pulls down the economy, because when trucks are not moving, then the economy's not moving. So there's so much to be done. And, we need to take care of our people too. This is an absolute must. I mean, we can do both. We can grow businesses. We can take care of our workers. We can put them into great paying jobs, and we can make and produce again. And we got ourselves into this position by our policies that offshored everything, and we can reverse engineer that and build the economy and build it equitably at the same time.
Sabrina, I want to add one more point to the comment that you made about delayed repair and investments. That we have numbers on that, and they're astronomical for each year that we delay making the investments that we need for our infrastructure. That deteriorates, and it ends up costing us 5 and 10 times more in only a few years. That's why it's not smart to avoid this problem and continue sticking our head in the sand while we have a crisis that's more and more emerging, even much more now because we're facing a potential recession.
Correct. I have one question for you before you go. This is from Henry. Why add another layer unnecessarily when you can just have the federal government spend on these things?
Because of the debt. The federal debt is the monster in the room. I always liken it to the velociraptor and the ferns over there that's going to come out and jump and eat you up. Our debt was $10 trillion before the financial crisis of 2008. After the financial crisis, it jumped to $20 trillion. And after COVID, it has now jumped to $30 trillion. That's 110% of GDP. We have to pay interest on the debt, and that interest is going to explode, especially now because we have inflation and rising interest rates. And if it goes really high, it could be astronomically bad for the United States. So one big reason is because the federal budget, state and local budgets have not worked to solve the infrastructure backlog. And another reason we can't do it on the federal budget dime is because of the federal debt.
Well, my MMT comrades would add that we could fix all this with MMT by just minting a coin, but totally hear where you're coming from. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for educating us about this. And I'll be sure to pass this on to other people as well, to let them know that this is legislation that's sitting there in Congress that really does need more co-sponsors. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabrina. Pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Good night.
Okay, guys. Let's go ahead and get into our thumbnail, what we're going to be talking about tonight. I hope you guys learned something there. I didn't know a lot about public banks until Roger Meadows. So hopefully you were able to learn something there. So what are we talking about tonight? Interesting stories this evening. It's a mixture. So tonight, we're discussing Kim Iversen pro-choice hypocrisy. That was a interesting debate on Rising. I can't wait to get into that story. So that's probably I think it's going to be the last story. Anyway, I can't wait to get into that story. That one's going to be good. I'm also going to discuss the RBG issue. Now, I've been hearing her name come up a lot recently, and there's some things I have to say in reference to Roe v. Wade. And also, I'm going to discuss Joe Biden sinks. I have some numbers I want to show you about recent polls with Joe Biden with key demographics. And of course, we just had our guest here to discuss the National Public Bank. So let's get into it. Really quick, I do want to shout out everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested, I have 5 categories. members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. Thank you guys so much. It really does help me out. And I want to give a shout out to a new Sabby patron, S.A. Black. Thank you so much. Their names are also scrolling across the bottom of the screen. So let's go ahead and get into our first story. Joe Biden, not doing too well. His poll numbers, his approval numbers continue to tank. But there was a recent poll that came out by Quinnipiac, and they list key demographics that I think we should all pay close attention to. So let's go ahead and share that. Okay. Now, this poll was released June 22nd. So that was just a couple of days ago. And there's some key numbers I want to focus on here. Let me scroll down. And by the way, if you're looking for this poll, this is not listed as a website, actually. Like, it was a link. I clicked on the link and it told me to download this. So I actually downloaded this, just letting you know. President Biden. Americans give President Joe Biden a negative 33 to 57% job approval rating, with 10% not offering an opinion. Those poor folks, those poor 10%, they are probably like, what the hell is going on around here? Biden's 33% job approval among Americans ties the low that he has received in 3 previous Quinnipiac University national polls. I'm going to make this larger for you because we're getting into the charts. Whoops, that was too big. There we go. Okay. Registered voters give President Biden a negative 35 to 58% job approval rating, with 7% not offering an opinion. Biden's 35% job approval among registered voters ties the low that he has received in 3 previous Quinnipiac University polls. Americans were asked about Biden's handling of, let me go in a little bit larger. Boopity boop. Let me scroll over here. Oh, maybe that is a little too large. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, that's just right. Americans were asked about Biden's handling of the response to the pandemic. 50% approve, while 44% disapprove. The response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 40% approve, while 51% disapprove. So this is important to note, you guys. The majority of Americans that were polled, I got to add that part, that were polled, disagree with the way that Joe Biden has handled Russia-Ukraine. Well. What do you know? The economy, 32% approve, while 62% disapprove. I'm willing to bet part of that 32% that approves of the economy is probably people who are pretty well off financially, wouldn't you say? It's probably people that are not as infected by the inflation that we have right now, people that can manage, that can get by. Gun violence, 31% approve, 57% disapprove. And remember, Joe Biden gave more money to the police. Just goes back to what we've said before. Police don't really stop crime, don't really prevent crime. So that's that. Abortion. Here comes this one. Now, this is when they were still awaiting the decision. As the nation awaits a major abortion ruling by the Supreme Court, this was right before they made the decision, registered voters agree 61 to 33. Now I got to go back out again. 61 to 33% with the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that established a woman's right to an abortion. So again, the majority of Americans agree with the original Supreme Court decision. That's important for people to know. I also want to add that is not just people who are Democrats. That includes Democrats, independents, and Republicans, and people who are, may not be invested in politics per se. But that's not just Democrats. I had to say that because I think a lot of times people think that the only people that are against abortion are people who are Republican, or people think that the only people that are for it are Democrats. That's not necessarily true. It goes on. In a Quinnipiac University polling trends among registered voters on this question dating back to 2005, the lowest level of agreement with Roe v. Wade was in 2010, when 60% agreed and 35% disagreed. The highest level of agreement was in January 27th, 2017 poll, when 70% agreed and 26% disagreed. So that's interesting. More people agreed with Roe v. Wade in 2017 than they do today. It doesn't explain why there was a decrease, but that's something I think that you should know. Now, let's go to this chart here. This is what I want you to really pay attention to. Question number 1, do you approve or disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling his job as president? So here we go. The total column is first. Next, you have Republicans, Democrats, independents, men, women, and then this is the college degree. 4-year college degree, yes or no? Let's break this down. 33%, only 33% approve of the way that Joe Biden is handling his job as president. Only 33%. And by the way, remember, this is right before the Supreme Court decision. Right before it. So I'm interested to see the next poll, because Joe Biden already said he doesn't want to end the filibuster, which everyone else that's trying to, quote unquote, protect women's rights in DC said that needs to happen. Joe Biden doesn't want to do that because Joe Biden not really trying to protect women's rights. Joe Biden's just trying to get paid and keep the status quo. 33% approve. Disapprove. 57% disapprove of Joe Biden's job as president, the way he's handling that job. And then there's 10% that said, look, we don't know, or not applicable. So let's look at Republicans. 7% of Republicans approve. 89% disapprove. 3 are just like, dude, I don't know. Democrats, 80% approve, 12% disapprove, 8% don't know. This is the metric here I want you to pay close attention to. Independents, 25% approve, 62% disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling his job as president. And that is a huge problem for the Democrats, because you have to remember Joe Biden was able to win Arizona because of the independent vote. That's probably not going to happen next time around. So if 62% of them disapprove of what Joe Biden is doing, he is going to struggle to get that same independent vote for 2024, unless something drastically changes, which it's him, so I doubt it. That's scary. When I reported this last summer, the disapproval that he had from independents was about in the 30s. It was about 35%. That has dropped all the way down. It's now 62%. This ship is sinking and everybody's jumping off of it except for Joe. Joe's going to ride this ship into the bottom of the ocean. He's going to go right down with it. There's another metric I want you to pay attention to. And by the way, 13% don't know. Okay. Men, 27% of men approve of Joe Biden's job as president. 62% disapprove. 11% just don't know. Just don't know. Now, this is interesting. Women, 39% of women approve of Joe Biden's job as president. 52% disapprove. 9% don't know. More women approve of Joe Biden's handling as president than men. However, I want you to remember that is before that ruling came out from the Supreme Court. So that's why I said I want to check this back again now that that ruling has been released. College degree, 4-year college degree. 43% of Americans that have a bachelor's degree approve of what Joe Biden is doing. 43%. 50% disapprove. 6% don't know. For Americans that do not have a bachelor's degree, 24% approve. 68% disapprove and 8% don't know. Now, why is this significant? Why is it that the Americans that have a bachelor's degree, why is their approval higher than the Americans that do not have a bachelor's degree? Why? Because 9 times out of 10, the Americans that have a bachelor's degree are probably making more money. 9 times out of 10, they probably have a higher income. When you're comparing them to Americans that do not have a 4-year degree. 9 times out of 10 is not always the case, but 9 times out of 10, they're probably making more money. So this is a class issue. Again, the people who are doing pretty well off financially versus the people who are struggling. I hope everybody sees the difference. Now I want to get into the age demographic. Let's look at the age groups. First, we have 18 to 34, ages 35 to 49, 50 to 64, 65 up. And then men, women, white, black, Hispanic. So when it comes to this age group, ages 18 to 34, only 25% approve of Joe Biden's job, of him handling his job as the president. Only 25%. And this is something I've been trying to tell people before, that the younger generation, again, these were my students, that age group, maybe not the 30 part, but this was the age group of students that I worked with. And this is what I've been trying to tell people. The younger people are not happy because they are struggling the most financially. They have high student loan debt. Some of them have medical debt. They're not paid what they should be paid when you adjust for inflation. And that was before this current inflation. They can't buy homes. They can't get married. They can't start families. This is the group that people need to pay closer attention to, which they usually don't. They focus a lot more on people age 65 and up because that's the population that usually heavily goes out to vote. But mark my words, they should really pay attention to this age group 18 to 34. I can understand if it was 18 to 24, 18 to 25, but now you're getting into the 30s. These are the people that are suffering with high student loan debt. 25% is bad. Like, this is really bad. And it doesn't get that much better from there. Watch this. So 55% of them disapprove and 20% don't know. Ages 35 to 49. This one is also concerning. Ages 35 to 49, 33% approve. 56% disapprove. 11% don't know. Even for that age group, 35 to 49, 33% is still, that's sad. That's sad. Because see, now you're going into the millennials. You got some Gen Xers in there. So you got Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X. They are not happy with what Joe Biden is doing. Ages 50 to 64. Oh, and again, these are the age groups. The Gen Z, millennial, and Gen X, these are the ones that are more likely to have a lot of student loan debt. Ages 50 to 64, only 35% approve. Now you're getting into my parents' age group. Only they approve, only 35% of them approve. And I can go ahead and tell you, you can go ahead and add my parents to that list because they do not approve. Had many conversations with them about that. Disapprove, 61% disapprove. 4% don't know. However, typically with politicians, they tend to focus more so on the 65 and up group because they're the ones more likely to come out and vote. 43% approve, 53% disapprove, 4% don't know. Either way, when you look at all of the age groups, the majority of people disapprove. That includes the booms. I said I'm gonna stop calling them boomers. My dad don't like that too much. So the booms. Now, men, or is it, yeah, men. How did I get to, oh, okay, racist. Okay, so white men, 24% approve, 69% disapprove, 7% don't know. Women, white women, 38% approve. Again, notice the women percentage is higher than the men. 55% disapprove, 8% don't know. Then we go to key racial demographics. And this is all together. So for white Americans, 31% approve, 62% disapprove, 7% don't know. When we look at Black Americans, 59% approve. And that may look like a high number to you, but when it comes to the Democratic Party, having 59% of African Americans approve, that is not good for you coming into the midterms or going into 2024. If that number does not increase, Democrats are in big trouble. You have to remember last year at one point, it was like 80% African Americans approved of the job Joe Biden was doing. He's dropped all the way down to 59% of African Americans. And without the African American vote, the Democratic Party cannot win. The candidate cannot win. So there's that. %31 disapprove. So that's important to remember. 59% for African Americans, that's not high in reference to Democrat candidate. 10% don't know. For the Hispanic demographic, 29% approve, 53% disapprove, and 17% don't know. Now, there is something I want to point out. If you look at people of color and you see African Americans and Hispanic Americans, this goes to show you how propagandized African Americans are in this country to keep voting Democrat. And the reason why I say that, Hispanic Americans approve, only 29% approve. White Americans, only 31% approve. And you come here to African Americans and 59% approve. And even though that's low for African Americans supporting the Democratic Party, out of all the racial groups, African Americans have the highest percentage of approval for Joe Biden, which means that Black Americans have been carrying these Democrat candidates over the edge. We've been the ones putting them through. And this is why I tell you, if we were to say, look, we're not voting for Dems anymore, which I've already told you, if more of us were to do that, we really could have an impact. This is what I've been trying to show people. We can really make a difference. Now, why do we still have 59% approval and white people have 31% and Hispanic population has 29%? Why are we still up that high to 59%? Why? Propaganda. Mainstream media propaganda. Propaganda from the Black church. Propaganda from the schools. Propaganda from former civil rights leaders who also spew propaganda on mainstream media outlets. People like Al Sharpton. That's why. So the more we are willing to turn off mainstream media, start doing our own research, stop allowing ourselves to be brainwashed by listening to Al Sharpton. He is not the Al Sharpton of the 1960s. He's not the same. Some of those civil rights activists and civil rights leaders embraced neoliberalism and they sold out. They're just trying to get their bag. Al just trying to get paid. So we have to get rid of the propaganda in order to really make a difference. Because what I would like to see, I would like for this number that's 59%, I would like for this to be at the 29% along with the Hispanic population. Show this to as many people as possible. It is the African American group that is carrying these Democrat candidates over the finish line. So in order for something to change, we need to really change that ourselves. Because if you cut that any further, we can make a big difference. Do you see what I'm saying? So the Democratic Party, they say they're going to do things for the Black community. They never do. But we keep giving them our support. We are the ones who are helping them win. But they don't help us win. When I saw these numbers, and you can look at this yourself, I think, Eric, if you can try to find this online, like I said, it was a link and then you go to the link and you have to download this document. But there's more numbers here. I can't go through all of them for the sake of time, but show this to as many people as possible. Show that to as many people as possible. There was a question in the chat. I saw it come up. I was going to grab it. Shoot balls. Where did it go? I saw it come up twice. I think it's from Hedges Gospel. Yep. Do you know if more Black men than women vote Democrat? More Black women, especially this last, the 2020 election. And we're the ones that have the most student loan debt. You see what I mean? Where would Biden be without us? Where would these Democrat candidates be without us? I'm going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Thank you for the super chat, Henry Gustav. The federal government can just spend on these things. The national debt is not, nor ever will be a problem. Well said, Henry. I don't have the original link. Oh, I'll have to find it, Eric. Andrew, I already made my predictions for the 2022 election. Senate, Democrats 43, Republicans 57, House 173, Republicans 262. Ooh, someone should screenshot this. I wonder if that'll happen, Andrew. Bart says, I love how Sabby does real research and fact digging and shares her sources with us. Thank you, Bart. I had to write a lot of research papers in grad school, Bart. That's where that comes from. I had to go through a lot of sources. Yasmin, ugh, we need to educate our elders. That's right. And Juliet, gotta leave the duopoly. 100% agreed. That can make a real change. Now, since Joe Biden is struggling here and is not doing well, you know that the Dems are going to try to do what they can to make things work out for Joe Biden. And now that's exactly what they're already starting to do. Case in point, Michigan. You got to see this from the New York Times. You got to see it. Now, this is from Josh Krushar. I hope I pronounced his name correct. Anyway, on Twitter, he's at Hotline Josh. At Hotline Josh. You used to call me on my cell phone. Josh is on the hotline. All right. New York Times. Senior Democrats are considering moving up Michigan on the primary calendar. A critical general election state where the president has a number of allies in labor and elected office. They're already starting. Already. Let's see if it'll let me. New York Times is funny. Sometimes it lets me, sometimes it. Okay. Biden irked by Democrats who won't take yes for an answer on 2024. Well. So here we go. We're gonna move this over a little bit. I'm not going to read this entire article, but I do want to get to the Michigan point here. Whoop, boop. There's Joe Manchin, of course. You know, he had to make his appearance. Yada, yada, yada. These articles sometimes are so long. I forgot to highlight. Here we go. The president has made clear he wants a primary calendar that better reflects the party's racial diversity, all but assuring the demise of the first in the nation status for the Iowa, which was hostile to Mr. Biden in his last two presidential bids. Senior Democrats are considering moving up Michigan, a critical general election state where the president has a number of allies in labor and elected office. You see how they play these little tricks? Somebody page Rome and let him know they're trying to move up his state. This is what they do to win. They know they can't do it fair and square, right? So they have to do these little tricks behind the scenes. And I'm telling you guys, so if you hear about this later on, you can say you saw it first here. It's June. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. They're already talking about moving states up in the primary election. They're so cruddy. They're so cruddy. The DNC has been quietly preparing for the president's reelection by pouring money and staff into 8 battleground states that happened to have an important midterm election, an effort that began in the spring of last year. Biden has also accelerated his fundraising, holding a pair of events for the committee in June that brought in $5 million, while also spending more time on Zoom sessions courting individual contributors. See, this is all they're doing. Fundraising. Fundraising. The president has moved to consolidate his hold on the DNC, and not just by sending Mr. Richmond to the committee. Mr. Biden has also shifted both his social media assets and his lucrative fundraising list to the party, which has made the committee largely reliant on those channels for their contributions. This is who they care about. They don't care about us. But the point that I wanted to make with that is to show you they're at it again. Didn't take them long. I'll take those comments on Rockfin Eric. Doobie doobie doo. Used to call me on my cell phone. Thanks for the tip, Roger. Thanks, Sabby. The bill is HR 3339. We currently don't have a Senate sponsor. Hey, your junior U.S. Senator always rails against private equity in Wall Street. You never know. They are all home now. That's right. People with higher degree, with a higher than no degree approval rating, have to be mostly made up of the older than 42 crowd. It shows you the racial breakdown and the age breakdown, but does it break down the age per race rather than separately? Also, LOL, AL was born in 1960. I think you meant he is not the Sharpton of the 1980s. Oh, yes, sorry. Here's a little trivia. It was in the paperback in 1980s that Strum Thurmond family owned the Sharptons back in the 1800s. That's right. Thank you for that, Roger. Yes, 1980s, sorry. I want to make sure I get these comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Justin B. Dems are tanking in approval. That's why they are trying to ask people that signed for Green Party candidate Matt Ho to take back their signatures. Something is rotten in North Carolina. They are scared. Yes. If you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen this as well, that they're trying to get people to remove their signature for Matthew Ho. Because Matthew Ho he got the signatures that he needs to get on the ballot. And now they're trying to do some trickery or whatever. It's so corrupt. It's so corrupt. Delthea Simmons says something has been rotten in NC for a long time. And thank you for the super chat, Andrew. Did it say anything about Biden's approval among the Asian and Indian communities? I did not see that in that chart. Interesting how they didn't put them in there. That is weird. That is weird. Very interesting. Okay. I want to go ahead and get into our next story, and that's about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, I have to tell you that I've seen people on social media recently really giving a lot of credit and praise to RBG and saying that if RBG would be here, she would be upset. She would be disappointed. There's also the consideration that Barack Obama could have put someone in her seat if she would have stepped down, but RBG was not ready to step down. There's been a lot of praise going around about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I think some people are not being honest about who RBG really was, and I'm going to acknowledge that tonight. But first, I do want to play a video for you. This is a clip from Case Study QB, and they are actually having the discussion about, was it a mistake for RBG not to step down when Obama was in office? So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. And let's go ahead and play this. Listen to this.
Another piece that come up, and you saw especially in liberal Twitter, a lot of, I don't know if criticism is the right word, a lot of anxiety over Ruth Bader Ginsburg's decision to stay on the bench when she was having health problems. I want to read, this is from a woman named Joan Biskupik back in the day, when she worked, back in the day, like me, wire experience. This is from Reuters in 2014. Asked what she believed Obama might think about her future, she said, "I think he would agree with me that it's a question for my own good judgment."
I remember when President Obama invited her to lunch to try to feel her out, to try to get her to step down or say something. And I remember saying to her, "Do you think he was fishing for you to say that you were going to retire?" And she said, "No, I think he was just there because he enjoyed my company and I enjoyed him." And that was that. But here's the thing, for all the people who blame this on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and clearly her untimely death in 2020, leading to Amy Coney Barrett, was a major piece here. But think of all that came before. Think of Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society. Think of Don McGahn from the White House Counsel's Office. Think of Mitch McConnell. Think of all the pieces that were put in place dating back to the Ronald Reagan administration when he ran on this kind of agenda and started putting this in place. Hillary Clinton. I mean, just think of all the other people. And I do think that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had lived just a few more weeks, that, you know, she was so close. She died on September 18th. And if she had just made it to right after the election, this probably couldn't have happened. But there we have it.
Yeah, and yet you do see, this is from after this the draft opinion leaked. Michelle Dauber, the Stanford law professor, she gambled. But she didn't just gamble with herself, she gambled with the rights of my daughter and my granddaughter. And unfortunately, that's her legacy. I think it's tragic.
I mean, there's a lot of anxiety, as you said. There's a lot of Democrats right now just looking for answers because they are powerless right now. And, you know, another piece of this is that Republicans recognized very early on, years ago, that the key to chipping away was at the state level. And they started investing tons of money in resources into flipping state houses. They did that in 2010. We saw Tea Party conservatives really rise, and they started passing restrictions. And that's another piece of why we're here today.
Right.
You know, I think they're being a little too kind about RBG. I think their language needs to be a bit harsher. Listen to this part one more time. This piece right here.
A woman named Joan Biskupik back in the day, when she worked, back in the day, like me, wire experience. This is from Reuters in 2014. Asked what she believed Obama might think about her future, she said, "I think he would agree with me that it's a question for my own good judgment."
I remember when President Obama invited her to lunch to try to feel her out, to try to get her to step down or say something. And I remember saying to her, "Do you think he was fishing for you to say that you were going to retire?" And she said, "No, I think he was just there because he enjoyed my company and I enjoyed him." And that was that. But here's the thing, for all the people who blame this on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and clearly her untimely death in 2020, leading to Amy Coney Barrett, was a major piece here. But think of all that came before. Think of Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society. Think of Don McGahn from the White House Counsel's Office. Think of Mitch McConnell. Think of all the pieces that were put in place dating back to the Ronald Reagan administration when he ran on this kind of agenda and started putting this in place. Hillary Clinton. I mean, just think of all the other people. And I do think that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had lived just a few more weeks, that, you know, she was so close. She died on September 18th. And if she had just made it to right after the election, this probably couldn't have happened. But
She's too nice there when talking about RBG. I'm going to tell you something that you may have not heard on other networks. Maybe you have, maybe you have not. But, you know, I like to keep it real on this show, and I'm going to keep it real with you. It was always really interesting to me, you know, especially after RBG passed away. It was interesting that here was this woman that a lot of liberals considered to be this icon, this iconic figure, a champion for women's rights. But she was also very racist. And I don't hear that mentioned much. I don't hear that mentioned a lot. It was also interesting to me that considering the racist rhetoric that RBG had, that they were actually able to profit off of using Notorious B.I.G.'s image, putting it onto RBG and selling it as a t-shirt. They were able to profit off of a black man's image and sell that through RBG. A racist, elitist, classist white woman. I'm going to call it out for what it is. I'm so sick and tired of seeing all these posts about, oh, if RBG was here, oh God, RBG was the greatest, the notorious RBG. No. Now, there was someone who was willing to call that out. You know, it turns out a couple of years ago, Katie Couric had an interview with RBG. And Katie Couric decided that she could not put everything into that interview because if people heard everything that RBG said, it would not be good for RBG. People will realize she was a racist. Let's talk about it. Katie Couric edited out controversial comments by RBG on kneeling protest. So here we go. Make this a little bit larger. Boom, boom, boom. In a new book, journalist Katie Couric reveals that she previously chose not to report the comments the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg made about athletes kneeling during the national anthem in protest against racial injustice. In an upcoming memoir, Going There, Couric says she held back some of Ginsburg's comments from a 2016 interview to protect the elderly justice. So, again, there were things that Katie removed because she knew that if people saw everything that she said, it would not be good for RBG. So Katie Couric decided to protect RBG's image. But apparently when she came out with her memoir, she mentioned the things that were removed. Here's some of them. In the 2016 interview published by Yahoo News, Ginsburg, who died last year, was quoted as saying that the protests by NFL players choosing not to stand before games were dumb and disrespectful. The kneeling protests led by former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick were meant to call out police violence and systemic racism against Black people in the United States. What Couric didn't include in Yahoo News interview was Ginsburg saying that athletes protesting in this way were showing a contempt for a government that has made it possible for their parents and grandparents to live a decent life, which they probably could not have had in the places they came from. I'm going to say this again. Ginsburg, make this bigger for you. Okie doke. Ginsburg saying that athletes protesting in this way were showing contempt for a government that has made it possible for their parents and grandparents to live a decent life, which they probably could not have lived in the places they came from. What the hell is she talking about? A decent life? Their parents and grandparents? My grandparents didn't live a decent life in this country. My grandparents came from Jim Crow South. They moved north to get away from the Jim Crow laws and to be able to get a job where they could make more money. What is she talking about? My grandparents grew up in poverty. My parents grew up in poverty. My grandparents and my parents did not live a decent life. Maybe to RBG, that's what she sees in her small, privileged little world. But I know different. Let's go back in. In her book, Couric says she held the comments back at the time because she wanted to protect Ginsburg, then 83, because she was elderly and probably didn't fully understand the question. Question that too. However, days after the 2016 interview came back, Ginsburg walked back her comments, saying in a statement that she had been barely aware of the protest or their purpose, and that her comments were inappropriately dismissive and harsh, and she should have declined to respond. That's bad too. Should have declined to respond. No, I just answered the question. Remember, she didn't walk her comments back until days after the interview came out. Then she decided to walk her comments back. This is terrible. That's just one example, you guys. This is just one example. But there were problems with RBG. Now, Katie Couric had the guts to put some of those things in her memoir. But I want to show you this is a problem. Now, I want to know, why is RBG using, or why are they using the Notorious B.I.G.'s image on RBG? You know, I never did like that phrase. I never did like it. When people started calling her the Notorious RBG, I'm like, no, that's from Biggie Smalls. He was the Notorious B.I.G. You don't take his crown and put it onto this woman's image and make a profit off of it. This is what they did. This is for sale. Now I'm going to show you the original. This crown, that crown that he wore, do you guys know that crown sold for $600,000 at an auction? Here's the picture. Now, this is where that image comes from. Those of us that grew up during that time, during the 90s, during hip hop, everybody knew that was Biggie's crown. This picture is pretty infamous. You also see this picture if you've seen it's the Marvel Luke Cage. If you watch Luke Cage on Netflix, this picture is in the office. And there's symbolism that goes with that. I don't want to give too much away because I want to tell the story. This is the Notorious B.I.G. They took this and they put it on a racist white woman. Does anyone not see the problem? And they made money off of it. $23. This is not okay. And I saw people wearing these t-shirts too. It just drove me crazy. I'm like, really? Stop stealing Black culture, hip hop culture, and passing it over to racist white people. Stop. Now I'll let this one in with this one because that's who's supposed to have it on. That's who's supposed to have the crown on. So in reference to whether or not I think that RBG should have stepped down, yeah, I think she should have stepped down. This goes back to term limits. This goes back to those lifetime appointments. I don't think these justices should have a lifetime appointment. I think there should be term limits on the Supreme Court, Congress, and in the Senate. How do you get an appointment for life? Who comes up with this? Have any of you had a job where you were appointed for life? I sure as hell haven't. Have you? Now there's been more, because now some of the politicians like Susan Collins, now she's trying to say that she feels like she was tricked with her vote for Kavanaugh. Now some of the politicians are coming out and they feel like they were tricked because they were told that those justices coming in were not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Tricked. I think Susan Collins is milquetoast. I also think she's full of shit. I think she's lying. I think she's trying to cover her own ass. But Case Study QB has a video about that here. Let's listen to what they had to say. Let's check it out.
Across the country, you have some of the fallout here in Washington. Susan Collins, Republican senator of Maine, says she's disappointed. She's upset. She thinks that Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, for that matter, misled her, I think is her word. And you have some Democrats saying this is the reason we need to expand the court. Or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, you know what? If Gorsuch and Kavanaugh lied or misled a senator, maybe they should be impeached.
We had two conservative senators in the United States Senate, Senator Manchin and Senator Collins, come out with a very explosive allegation that several Supreme Court justices misled them during their confirmation hearings and in the lead up to their confirmation. This is a crisis of legitimacy. I believe lying under oath is an impeachable offense.
You can understand the frustration among liberals, progressives, but is any mood in Congress to impeach, any mood in Congress to take up the court, expanding the court? Right now, the Democrats don't have the votes, period, right?
No, they do not. There's a lot more energy in getting more Democrats in the U.S. Senate and keeping the House majority than there is in, adding more Supreme Court justices to the court at this point. That's something that, they feel like they can control, is getting more people out to vote.
Oh, yeah. She said the quiet part out loud. Yes, she did. So first of all, for AOC to come in and say, oh, well, they were tricked. You expect me to believe Susan Collins was tricked? You've been a politician for how long? And I'm supposed to believe you fell for the okie doke. They were conservative coming in. Why do you think Donald Trump appointed them? You knew what they were brought in to do. I was tricked. Maybe you shouldn't be a politician then.
And you have some Democrats saying this is the reason we need to expand the court. Or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, you know what? If Gorsuch and Kavanaugh lied or misled a senator, maybe they should be impeached.
Misled them.
We had two conservative senators in the United States Senate, Senator Manchin and Senator Collins, come out with a very explosive allegation that several Supreme Court justices misled them during their confirmation hearings and in the lead up to their confirmation. This is a crisis of legitimacy. I believe lying under oath is an impeachable offense.
AOC, you cannot believe this. I don't buy it. You went to Boston University. I worked at Boston University. You studied international relations and economics. You worked for Ted Kennedy. There is no way I'm buying this. You cannot believe this. You cannot be that dense and that naive to think that these politicians who have been in office for years actually were misled.
You can understand the frustration among liberals, progressives, but is any mood in Congress to impeach, any mood in Congress to take up the court, expanding the court? Right now, the Democrats don't have the votes, period, right?
No, they do not. There's a lot more energy in getting more Democrats in the U.S. Senate and keeping the House majority than there is in, adding more Supreme Court justices to the.
So she just let you know where the energy is at. They're not trying to add any more Supreme Court justices. That is not where their focus is. I know some of the American people are focused on that, but she's just letting you know they're not focusing on that. So, nope.
the court at this point. That's something that they feel like they can control, is getting more people out to vote.
Across the country.
Did you catch that part at the end about what they can control? Listen to this. Listen to her one more time.
Than there is in adding more Supreme Court justices to the court at this point. That's something that they feel like they can control, is getting more people out to vote.
Something that they feel like they can control is getting more people out to vote. Well. Did she not say the quiet part out loud? That's what they're focused on. That's where their focus is at. That's why they're just trying to fundraise. Let me get more people out to vote. That's it. That's all they really care about. Zainab said, so 9 people get to decide our fate. That's the scary part. So few people get to decide what happens to you. Ben C said, I'm glad Sabby is bringing up what I call the elitism of RBG. Absolutely. Can people please stop with the worship of RBG? Laura Hansen said, when you hear RNC or DNC, replace with Uniparty and see how insane your logic sounds. A kid said, Sabby, please consider how intensive and effective MSM and status quo propaganda is that most Democrat voters still believe RBG, Obama, Clinton were actually good for women. They do. It's really sad. Thanks for the super chat, Bernie. Call it out. Thank you. Angela says, and what is her defense for pulling it? Because it would make her look bad. Isn't it a journalist's job to report the facts without feelings and then to blame it on her being old? Yo, Sebastian said RBG sided with corporations. All of them, by the way, all the justices. That's why they picked them for a reason. Indy left. Only a rich white dude would come up with it. Jilly Love, Dems prime directive. Offer no solutions. Basically, they're not really trying to solve anything. Not really trying to solve anything. They are not solutions based. Now, there's something else I want to show you because I do want to give a shout out to the protesters, the people who are out there doing the damn thing. There was another protest at Judge Alito's house. And there's something I want to show you. I'm going to show you the first clip, and then there's another clip I want to show you about how liberals focus on the wrong thing. So this was outside Judge Alito's house. Let it rip.
Spineless, gutless Democrats, expand the fucking court. Spineless, gutless Democrats, expand the fucking court. Spineless, gutless Democrats, expand the fucking court. Spineless, gutless Democrats, expand the fucking court.
See, they're saying expand the court. Again, like I told you, that's what a lot of the people want, but that's not what the politicians in DC want. That's not what Joe Biden wants.
Spineless, gutless Democrats, expand the fucking court. No privacy for us. No peace for you. No privacy for us. No peace for you. No rights for us. No peace for you. No abortions for us. No peace for you. No privacy for us. No peace for you. No privacy for us. No peace for you. Alito is a coward. A motherfucking coward. A motherfucking coward. A little baby coward. The baby coward.
I just want to pause it here. See all the protection that Judge Alito has outside his house. You guys see this? They're protecting him. Again, the police protect Capitol. This is wealth. They're protecting wealth. Let me tell you something. If you or I were threatened, if we had people protesting outside our house all the time, do you think the cops would show up and protect us like that? No. There we go.
Alito is a coward. Alito is a liar. My body, my choice.
is it? This is outside Judge Alito's house. I don't know where he lives, but I'm assuming probably somewhere near DC in the suburbs.
Fuck you, Alito! Fuck you, SCOTUS! Fuck you, SCOTUS! Fuck you, SCOTUS! Fuck you, SCOTUS! Fuck you, Alito! Fuck you, Alito! Fuck you, Kavanaugh! Fuck you, Kavanaugh! Fuck you, Thomas! Fuck you, Thomas! Fuck you, Barrett! Fuck you, Barrett! Fuck you, Gorsuch!
I just want to give a shout out to the men who are out there marching with the women. I really do appreciate the solidarity. I really do appreciate that. Now, there's another part of this protest that I do want to show you where one of the neighbors, I guess, was somewhat offended. Surprise, surprise. And I want you to hear what she says. Here we go. Let me start it back. Now, here comes the neighbor.
But not the F word. We have so many little kids, and it's louder on our street than it is. This is America. We still have the first.
We just lost our rights, so for respect, I will say whatever the fuck I want.
Little kids need to know how fucked up the world is.
So that neighbor, she went up to them and said, "Can you please not use the F word?" Really? Really, woman? With everything going on, you went up to them and asked, oh no, I feel like they should say whatever they want. Here's the liberal. Where's she at? Let me bring her back. Come on back. Let us all see your face. See, this is, I appreciate what you're doing. I understand what you're doing. But can you please not use that word because of the kids in the neighborhood? Look at the expression on her face. See, this is the liberal mindset. This is what I was telling you about before. Why didn't she, when she went out there to that crowd, why didn't she come out there with a sign herself? Why didn't she come out there with water bottles? I'm sure it's hot, bringing them water bottles. Asking to help, march along with them. No, she left her comfy house to go out there to ask protesters not to use the F word. That's bothersome. That's troublesome to her. It's too vulgar. But I would argue the fact that those women, a lot of women in the United States just lost their rights. I would say that that is probably the most vulgar thing. That should be your main concern, not them using the F word. There's kids in the neighborhood. Can you please not use the F word? Please. You think your kids haven't heard that word at school? Look at her. Look at her. Look at this. It just, come on. It's obvious this is a wealthy neighborhood. Watch her. She focusing on the wrong thing.
Lost our rights, so for respect, I will say whatever the fuck I want.
Little kids need to know how fucked up the world is.
Fuck all fascists! Fuck all fascists! Alito is a fascist! Alito is a fascist! Alito is a fascist! Alito is a fascist! Alito is a fascist!
So, her asking them not to use that word just made them use the word more. And that's that. And we need to have more protests like this happening across the country. God, my child's ears. We can't let the kids hear the word. I had a friend who actually, why is it all the way over there? I had a friend who she used to clean houses. She did it for like extra money. And one of the things that she said to me is that you'd be surprised. Like some of these rich people, she said, they're just very unhappy people. She said, you'd be surprised what you see in their house. Moving on to my next story. So on Rising, there was a pro-choice debate. Now, this topic has come up, especially since Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. So now the question that's coming up, and I got to be careful how I talk about this, but now the question that's coming up is that if you say you are pro-choice, can you be pro-mandate? If you're for bodily autonomy, can you be pro one and not pro the other? That's the question that has come up. So Kim Iversen talked about this morning on Rising. There's a little bit of a debate here. Let's see what Kim had to say.
Kim, I've been looking forward to this all weekend. Tell us what's on your radar.
Well, I know there's been a lot of talk today about the Supreme Court Roe v. Wade ruling, but I just have to chime in. The phrase, my body, my choice, has become incredibly controversial because everyone seems to be using it, and yet none of them agree with one another. Here's what I mean. Look at this photo from is this from a pro-choice or anti-vaccine mandate rally? Good question. It could have come from either. The anti-mandate crowd, including myself, have been calling for bodily autonomy and the ability to decide for ourselves whether or not to take the vaccine. Many were saying, my body, my choice. Many in this category came from conservative America, the same conservative America now celebrating the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which will lead to women being required to carry pregnancies to term in about half the country. On the flip side, the current crowd yelling, my body, my choice, were many of the same people demanding others around them get the vaccine or lose their jobs and be shunned from society. It's a confusing time. How can a person be pro-mandate, forcing others into a medical treatment they don't want, while being shocked that anyone would force a woman to carry a fetus she doesn't want? And how can a person be anti-mandate, claiming it's their individual right to decide their own medical treatment, yet tell a woman it isn't her individual right to decide her own medical treatment?
By the way, before I saw this, when I heard people talking about, oh, look at the hypocrisy, some of the same people that were, pro-mandate are anti-choice when it comes to abortion. I saw people having these discussions back and forth on social media. And the first thing I said to myself is, because I knew that Kim just got married. So I knew that she was coming back to Rising. And the first thing I said to myself when I saw that was, I bet you Kim's going to talk about this. I said, I bet you Kim Iversen is going to cover this. And I was right. So let's go back in.
It all feels hypocritical, but the people in these camps don't seem to see it that way. Now, I've looked around at some of the arguments from both sides, and I want to share them with you. Some of them are shockingly dense, and others actually make some decent points. So let's start with the liberal pro-choice crowd who are also pro-vaccine mandate. Now, truthfully, most can't give a good, solid reason as to why they're pro-mandate and pro-choice. Take a look at this TikTok video from a Chance at Life.
What's important is bodily autonomy, the same right men have always had. We just want equal rights. The right to govern our own bodies, just like men have always had. It's that simple.
Do you support the right for people to not get the COVID vaccine?
It's irrelevant.
It's the same topic, right? My body, my choice.
You're right. It's not irrelevant.
Yeah, but one saves lives.
It's not irrelevant. One of them is going to be in a pandemic state, right? A state of emergency, which we all know laws change during a state of emergency.
Do you agree with the statement or the principle of my body, my choice?
Yes, absolutely. Bodily autonomy is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. Access to healthcare should not be something that is dictated by the Supreme Court.
During the pandemic, did you support people's right to not get the COVID vaccine?
It's a difficult conversation.
Do you support bodily autonomy in other situations? For example, the COVID vaccine mandates.
The vaccine mandates, we've been mandated to get vaccines for years and years and years.
So you do support in that situation people not having control of their body?
Have we? Because let's think about something for a second. Have we really been mandated to get? So, for example, the flu. Thousands and thousands of people get the flu every year, right? Who does the flu usually affect the most? I guess I wouldn't say the most, but who is more likely to struggle with flu symptoms? The elderly, right? How many of you that are watching get the flu vaccine every year? Raise your hand. Anybody? Anybody? Anyone? I don't get it. I don't get it. Now, when I worked in healthcare, I had to get it. So when I had that position, I did get it every year. But since then, I don't get it. So to her point, have we really been forced to get these jabs for decades? Now, I know there were certain ones that you had to go to school. Like I had to have them when I went to college. There were certain ones that I had to get. But I think she's a little bit off here. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But let's finish.
That's not having not control of your bodies. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, so, fairly flimsy reasoning there, but there are some other somewhat better reasons people give. The most common is because a virus is contagious and pregnancy isn't. That's the biggest excuse you'll use as to why a person is pro-choice and pro-mandate. The idea...
I'm sorry. When she said a virus is contagious and pregnancy isn't, I'm laughing because my friends and I used to have a joke about pregnancy being contagious, because obviously not seriously, but it was serious. It was true in the sense that one would get pregnant, then the next thing you know, next year the other one's pregnant, then the other one's pregnant, and people would like point fingers and say it's coming your way next. So I'm laughing at that because that was the first thing I thought of when I heard that.
Idea being that you should do everything you can to prevent infecting others. You'd then have to ask them, well, why wouldn't you want to infect others, right? And then they would say, well, because it could kill them. So you don't want to cause another person harm. Then when it's pointed out that terminating a pregnancy is affecting another person, the response is usually that a fetus isn't a person. So basically their argument hinges on the debate over when cells become a person. In this line of logic, they believe in mandates for protecting people, but don't agree that a fetus is a person. So then we could say, what about the fact that vaccines weren't good for everyone? Some people were harmed, like the teen boys who ended up with myocarditis, or women who ended up with blood clots. Why would you mandate a person take something that could harm them if your whole line of reasoning is to protect people? Another common response to being both pro-mandate and pro-choice is that vaccine mandates aren't really mandates. You can still choose to not get the vaccine. No one is forcing you, unlike a woman being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. That's the argument. It's true, no one was going to door holding people down and jabbing them, but not getting the vaccine resulted in job loss and being ostracized from society. It wasn't much of a choice at all. I guess they could lose their job and be unable to afford their homes or feed their families, but then you could also say that a woman isn't forced to carry a pregnancy. She could just fly to California. Now, I'm pro-choice and I'm anti-mandate. I firmly believe all medical decisions should be between a patient and a doctor, no matter what that decision may be.
I just want to jump in and say the part here about a woman isn't forced to carry a baby to term, she can like fly to California. I think the difference between the two is that when it comes to pregnancy per se and someone deciding if they're going to get an abortion, the woman that's able to hop on the plane and fly to California, that's usually someone that has money. That's usually someone that has the wealth to do that. Whereas women who are poor and low income, they're not going to be able to do that. That's the problem. And this was my biggest, I guess my biggest anger about the Supreme Court basically leaving the decision back to the states, right? So I think that's the difference. One requires money, whereas the other, when it comes to the jab, I got to say the jab on here, guys. You know how it is with YouTube. When it comes to the jab or whatever, that doesn't require. So that's the difference. Now, there were some employers that were saying, if you didn't get this, then you can't work here. My former employer was like that. So, I mean, I didn't have a choice. Like I had to, well, I guess you could say I did have a choice. I could just leave my job, but then I wouldn't have an income. If I wanted to keep my job, I had to get it done. And I had to have the little card that they gave you. I had to upload that into the system at Boston University. You couldn't come back to work without it. So yeah, it sucks. It really does suck, but I probably would have gotten it anyway, but it did make me feel some kind of way that like they told me I had to. Even people who were working remotely, by the way. And that was the part I didn't understand. Because if you're working remotely, why were they required to get it and they're not even coming to work in person? I didn't understand that at all, but there are companies out there that did that as well.
Even for giving people the choice to medically end their life if that's what they want. Decisions are difficult, personal, many are unique, and quite frankly, none of those decisions are any of my business. But the anti-mandate, anti-choice crowd have some better arguments on their side as to how they can be both and not be hypocrites. One argument is that it isn't about my body, my choice, or medical freedom, that it's about safety and health. They say they were opposed to mandates because they didn't believe the vaccine to be safe for everyone. They worried about side effects and other harms, and forcing some people to take them would result in a slew of injuries and maybe even death. They say this is not out of alignment with being opposed to terminating a pregnancy. It's in fact very much in line. It's all about protecting lives. Now, this is the most common explanation as to why a person is both pro-choice with vaccines and anti-choice with pregnancy termination. Other arguments center around the vaccine being something done to yourself and an abortion is something done directly to someone else. But pro-mandate people say spreading a virus affects others. Then the anti-mandate people say these vaccines don't stop the spread. And then some actually say they would be for the mandates if the vaccines were sterilizing. So at least they're consistent.
So one thing I do want to add here in reference to one affects yourself and one affects someone else. This is where I like to have the scientists and the doctors come in because, you know, I've had this conversation with friends of mine as well that are against abortion. And their argument always tends to be, well, it's a human life. It's a human form. And I just revert back to the science, and the science shows you that it's not at that point, that they're cells, that at that point, it is not an actual baby. But I don't want to get into that whole debate tonight. I could go on that forever, but I would argue that it's actually not at that point, but to each its own.
Another argument, don't laugh, or better yet, don't shoot the messenger. It involves the depopulation agenda theory. The theory is some people think the vaccines were part of a larger depopulation agenda, and typically they tie it to Bill Gates. The idea is the world can't sustain the growing population, and some elites are scheming to bring the population down to more sustainable levels. They think the vaccine was designed to help do this, but by maybe affecting fertility or causing a higher number of heart attacks or something. Obviously, terminating pregnancies is also a form of population control, and they're against the whole lot of it. So you might scoff at this theory or think they're crazy, but at least they're consistent in their logic. And that's all I ask for. Be consistent and make sense. I might not agree, but I can at least appreciate a person who is fully pro-mandate or someone fully pro-choice or something in between, as long as it makes sense.
I've heard that too, Mr. X. Some will say that life starts at conception. And to that, I say, then should men get vasectomies? Because why is it, this is something I've noticed, like, why is it just the woman? Like, should men get vasectomies if life starts at conception? I'm being funny, of course.
I just want it to make sense. So, you know, you guys, what do you think? I mean, which side do you think is actually making sense on this? Do you think anybody is making sense in that group specifically that is, you know, anti-mandate, anti-pro-choice, or I don't like using the term pro-life,
right?
Or do you, on the flip side, you know, the crowd that's very pro-choice right now, very angry, but then they were the ones saying take the vaccine or else.
Right. Well, and this Supreme Court decision also, let's remember, just returns the issue to legislative bodies, to the states, the federal government, I guess, if they wanted to take it up, they don't, but by and large, the states. So just like, you know, we had a variety of state responses to what the restrictions were, what the requirements were, et cetera, we'll now have that for abortion. So I think in that way that the conservative kind of view is not hypocritical in that sense, because there's, especially with this news, right? They're saying, yeah, we're going to let smaller groups of legislative decision makers, just like we would have let them say, you know, what the appropriate vaccine requirement is, whatever, or they'll decide what the in this municipality what the abortion policy is.
Just got to pause it for a second so it can catch up. Hold on. Wee. Go back out. Okay.
I think it's still hypocritical when you look at it then state by state, because a lot of those conservative states that are going to be making abortion illegal are the states that were fighting against the mandates.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. Can we talk about it? That's a bad place to pause it. I'm trying to get better at this, you guys, like not pausing it in bad spots like I did last night and everybody was laughing. Why is you swirling? Don't swirl on me. That's a good point, though. Let's talk about that for a second. Do you think it's hypocritical that some of those red states that were against the mandates are now the states where abortion has been banned? And I showed you that map last night. I can pull it up again if I still have it in my email, but I showed you the map last night of the states that have the official ban now since that overturn in the Supreme Court, and the states that have the trigger ban and et cetera. So I showed you that yesterday. And I gotta say, that's a valid question. So which is it? Because it's like the same people who were saying, or not everyone, but the same states that were like, no, we're not going to make people wear a mask. No, we're not going to make people get these jabs. Now those same people, those same states are like, yeah, we're going to make you have this baby. But, you know, we're going to say we're pro-life, but we're not really pro-life because we're just more so pro-birth. Because once the baby's born, we don't really care what happens to that kid. Something to think about.
Because a lot of those conservative states that are going to be making abortion illegal are the states that were fighting against the mandates.
Yeah.
Against the vaccine mandates. So, you know, you could look at it still in that. We'll see what Florida does in particular. That'll be really interesting. And they're kind of up in the air. Alimi, what do you think?
So I did point out actually earlier in my own radar that I think there is hypocrisy to the people that are decrying, you know, government is violating my rights by trying to make me wear masks. I was talking about the mask, not the vaccine, but
yeah, she was speaking our language.
Yeah,
Ole was talking some mask anger. I was getting very excited.
I said, you know, I think it's hypocritical that you would, you know, scream something as to me trivial, wear a mask, you know, is my rights are being violated, but then in the same breath, you're pro, you know, women being forced to carry pregnancies to term that they don't want to. That being said, I think the conversation we're having is a reflection of why people co-opt language and the danger of that, because what happened here is the pro-choice movement in terms of abortion has already existed. My body, my choice is the language for that movement. And then you saw, you know, the anti-vaccine mandate movement appear, and it co-opted that language and means to lend legitimacy to its arguments. So now
let's talk about co-opting. See, this was the thing when I saw this clip, I was like, both of them have valid points. But let's talk about the co-opting, because we've seen this happen a couple of times, right? Like one group or organization or one movement will have a certain type of rhetoric. And we use a lot of times we see this happen through politics, right? The Democratic Party will co-opt the language. And then it's like everybody can say that they're progressive now. That's a good example. Everyone can say they're progressive now. Anyone can use that term. So that's something to think about in reference to co-opting.
We have this conversation where it's like, oh, how do you support one and not the other? Because that feels like hypocrisy. It's not. They co-opted the language and now we put them in the same arena, and I don't think they really exist there. And I think it's different because, for me, I think in the course of abortion and when you have these conversations about my body, my choice, it's because it impacts me, my body. Whereas the people who were pro the vaccine mandates, what they're saying is, in this case, this is a pandemic. This impacts us all, which is generally the underlying argument that supports vaccines in general, because we have vaccine mandates in general.
Just like that, right? In the way that liberals will say, or supporters of vaccine mandates will say, well, no, that the disease impacts other people, so your right to bodily autonomy, maybe so it was just you fine, it gets overridden because it affects other people.
So you're going to say this is
what
a child.
Conservatives will say about that. They'll say this affects a life.
And I have a response.
Right.
Regardless, I don't even feel like we need to get into the philosophical discussion of whether or not it's a fetus or it's a child or where it starts or any of that, because the reality is unborn child, fetus, none of them have any social standing as members of the society. They have no rights. They are not counted in the portion in our population at all. So this conversation where we conflate the two is it's non-existent. They don't, whether or not you think it's a fetus or a child, neither one of them unborn, none of them have any rights. So this idea now
but they could. But they could. I mean, look, I'm very, very pro-choice, But I see the logic actually on the pro-life side. I do think that they hold very logical arguments, and it can be, and I think they make sense. And you could make the laws change. I mean, yes, right now, sure, there's no rights for these fetuses, but it doesn't mean there won't be in the future. And it doesn't mean that these activists are trying to make that happen.
Do you think that the people that are generally anti-choice, the people that want the abortion bans, are interested in affording rights to unborn children and fetuses when half the current children, we have this country has tons of children that are not being supported. We have children living in homelessness. We have children in foster care systems.
Right,
we have children that don't have the resources. Do you think those people advocating for that want rights for unborn children? Is that what they want?
And this is the point that I always bring up again. A lot of times you hear people say that they're pro-life, but when you start to talk to them about the education system, when you talk to them about healthcare, oh, do you think that they should have healthcare? Oh, no, we have health insurance. Just get a job that has good health insurance. Oh, okay. Well, do you think that that child deserves the right to have a good education? Well, yeah. What if that child's born in poverty and that's why the mom wants to have an abortion because she can't afford to raise the child? Oh, well, then they should live in an area that has a good zip code so they can go to a good school and get a decent education. But the mother is poor, so she can't afford to live in that area, which means that her child is going to grow up in poverty. Oh, well, then the mother shouldn't be poor. These are the kind of arguments that I've had with people. Like, I'm not kidding. Oh, well, then the mom shouldn't be poor. What if the mom was born in poverty and her parents were in poverty? And, poverty is a cycle. So a lot of times if someone's poor, a lot of times it's because their parents were poor. So it's hard to get out of that cycle. But I've had these arguments with people back and forth, and I'm saying, if you don't care about education, and as someone who's a former educator, if you don't care about education, if you don't care about healthcare, if you don't care about having decent rights, my thing is then you're not really pro-life. You're not. You're pro-birth. And why are you pro-birth? Why are people like Bill Gates so I don't want to say frustrated, so flustered right now about the birth rate? Why? Because they need people to have babies, because they need people to do labor. They need people to have babies because they need people to do the work. They need the labor. And the birth rate in the United States is declining because you have people, my generation, millennials, Gen Z, not having kids, partially because they can't afford to. Someone has to deal with the climate crisis. Some people don't want to because they're like, yo, you see what's coming? So there's different reasons for it, but the birth rate is declining. People aren't producing as many kids like they did with my parents' generation or the silent generation. That means you're not going to have enough people here to do the labor. Come on. Why else would Bill Gates give a flying fuck about the declining birth rate? Something to think about. Let's go back in.
I do think that they make logical arguments when it comes to when they think a life begins and what is killing that life. They are, that's where you have to draw that line. You have to say, when is a person, and that's the discussion to have.
But I think we've landed on what I think is the disingenuousness of it, right? Because none of us can say that we believe that they want rights for these unborn children and fetuses. So what's it really about, right? You're saying, oh,
well, they want it, but it's the right not to be. It's negative versus positive rights, right? They're saying that that the fetus at a certain point is enough like a child. It has the right not to be destroyed or killed.
But you don't care about children.
But that's different than saying you have a right to be taken care of or given support or something like that. You just have a right not to literally be killed. You have a right against violence, and they think abortion is exercising violence against a person.
And that would be more believable in a society that supported children and took care of children and expressed the same kind of concern for children in all these other arenas. Why are we so...
Say it. Say it again.
Oh, this child has a right to live. Child has a right against violence. This child has a right to all these things. But you don't. When the child is actually here, when we unequivocally know that they're children, when we're no longer engaged in a debate of whether or not it's a child or it's a fetus, when they're here, we are not, the same people advocating for this are not doing or advocating for resources and helping these living kids.
A right to resources is different. The right to health care or education or housing is different than the right to not be killed.
Right. Sure. What they would say is,
but they're not killed. I think when I think about life, for me, life just isn't birth. And I think that's where there may be a disconnect, because I'm talking about life. I'm talking about education. I'm talking about your health. I'm talking about relationships. I'm talking about families. So I'm not just focusing on the fact that a baby is born. So to me, if you are pro-life, you're talking about the full spectrum, the full scale of it, the full life, not just the baby was born.
Is that these are not equivalent arguments. A child that is living, even if they're in foster care right now, not being taken care of, even if they're living on the street, have the right to not be killed. Everybody has that right. That's what they would say. They would say that's the only thing that they care about is, do you have the right to not be murdered? I would think a better argument against them is, okay, what about war? So many of them are warmongers. And then you'd say, well, if you're such you're fine droning people in Afghanistan or now in Ukraine or wherever it is, you're fine, or in Russia, you're fine doing all of that. But at the same time, you say you believe in the right for a person to live and not be killed.
So I do want to jump in and add that part, because I've had that argument with people before, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you what they're going to say. They're going to come in and say, well, war is in the Bible. I used to live in the Bible Belt, you guys. I'm telling you. That's what they're going to come back and say. They're going to say war is in the Bible. The Bible talks about war, about people going to war, and they'll be able to use that excuse. This is the problem with, and I talked a little bit about this last night in reference to Christianity. I want you to look at the bigger picture. This is the problem with some, again, it's not the individual people. It's not Christians per se. It's not the individual people. It's the religion as a whole. It's the fact that you can make excuses for doing bad things to people because you can point to a message in a book. They did this in the Bible. They did this in the Bible days. So that's why war is okay. And I've heard people make those discussions. So that's probably what they would come in and say, especially if you're like down in South Carolina, like where I was, if you're talking to them about that, they might come in and say that. Not defending them. I'm just saying that's how they might respond to that.
Is a more equivalent argument to make against them. But this is a big debate. It's a debate that maybe society.
Well, I know we won't, unfortunately we won't.
So that was an interesting discussion. Let me come out of here. I thought that was an interesting discussion because I know I see some of the comments people are quoting, like Laura said, the Bible, the ink blot test of kindness. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, those are questions that I would ask people sometimes. And I'll give you an example with myself. When I was in high school for a year, I went to a Pentecostal church for the first time, going to Pentecostal. Now, I didn't grow up Pentecostal, but my friend was there and she asked me to go and I became a member of the church. That's a whole long story. We need to get on all that. But anyway, I remember asking questions. I had some questions and I asked them, why is it that the women cannot wear pants? And they would tell me that it's in the Bible. And then I would ask them, okay, where is it in the Bible? And they would point to it and I would say, that doesn't say women can't wear pants. And the scripture that they were referring to is where it mentions that a woman is not supposed to wear a man's apparel. And then I came back and I would say, well, if that's the case, then all the pictures and images that you see from the Bible days, the men basically wearing robes or whatever you want to call dresses, whatever you want to call it. And they didn't like that. But that was something that was like every time, like anytime you had like a question, and I was like, well, I don't understand. Like same thing with the makeup. Why can't the women wear makeup? I asked that question. They said, because in the Bible, prostitutes wore makeup. What? This is why I'm telling you, this is what they will say, because I have had those discussions over and over again. And I'm like, so does that mean that everyone that wears makeup is a prostitute? Why can't the women wear jewelry? Because in the Bible, the prostitutes wore jewelry. They didn't really have to give you a reason for it. They were just able to just point to it and say, this is why. And so those arguments were never fun, because I'm one of those people, like I show you on my show, I like to do research. I like to look for receipts to back up what I'm saying. And the only receipt they seemed to have for me was the Bible. And half the time, the scriptures that they would point to don't even say what they just said. So it is what it is. It is what it is. Not trying to shame people who are Pentecostal either. I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of questions. I'll take the comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Dave. It's crazy and astonishing how corrupt and violent the political class in the U.S. is. I agree. Thank you for this tip on Rockfin, Roger. Yo, we smoke spliffs. We pack 4/5 just in case Dredd want a riff. He get a free lift to the cemetery. Rough, very. Not your ordinary. We watch you get buried. That's a real in for you. Get mad, do a quarter, flip the script. I cannot rap, you guys, so I'm sorry. I apologize. Do a script and rip your lawyer, spit at the DA, because F what she say. She don't give a F about your ass anyway. Sorry, Sab. Couldn't resist. Got triggered by good music. Okay. I know I'm really going to get shamed for this one. People are like, she cannot rap. No, I can't. How many times has she or someone in her household said F in the presence of her kids? Matter of fact, how many times have they seen porn? I saw it as a kid before the internet. What do you think they're seeing now? Kicking it to the states as CODIS has ruled. I don't think conservatives want that fight. Virginia and Georgia were once red states. Now, because of New Yorkers moving there since the late 80s, Virginia is blue and Georgia is purple. Now that has ramped up with New York and California tag teaming to bombard Florida, Utah, Idaho, and Texas with people who are their political opposite. Now, I'm not a party person, as you know. I wish we abolished all parties and vote Indy and BI and repeal laws through VR instead. But I don't think they want this fight. Governor Greg Abbott bragged on camera about how Californians moving here, but off camera said, I just wish they'd stop voting Democrat. Also, voters in those states, please push Medicare for all ballot initiatives in your state and stop beating around the bush and doing incrementalism with Medicaid expansion, regulating health insurance. And thank you so much for the tip, Snorky. You are completely missing it. There are no babies to be adopted. And one of the main reasons for church to make money is to provide babies for adoption. A priest needs several adoptions per year just to pay their expenses and probably more for rape payments. Yikes. Thank you for this this tip, Roger. Regarding need people for labor, in the 1980s, mostly 90s investors in private prisons would tour schools in poor Black neighborhoods, looking at how many from this school are failing, so they can make calculations on how many prisons they need to have ready in a decade to house them. Just quote the last verse of 1981, The Message, a child is born with no state of mind, blind to the ways of mankind. My sister, a born-again Christian, asked me, do you believe in aliens? I said, sure you do. Do you? She said, well, the Bible doesn't mention it. I said that the Bible never mentioned dinosaurs either, but they existed. Oh, Roger Meadows, that is a good one. Ouch. Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm thinking about like that debate, and I'm thinking to myself that like, why is that there? Sorry. I'm thinking about that debate, and I was just thinking to myself that like, I can see all of these cases, you know, I get where both of them are coming from. I personally, like, I believe in bodily autonomy as well. I don't like to tell people what to do with their bodies. That's also why I think that all drugs should be decriminalized. I think all drugs should be legal. And some people will hear that and they're like, you're extreme. Whoa, slow down. That's too much. We can't take it. It's really none of my business what someone else puts into their body. If that's their choice, that's their choice. That would probably also decrease the crime rate too. But that's just me. All right. I'm going to shout out some of these super chats here. Thank you for the super chat, David Doyle. Question: the T/Freedom Party was able to take over the Republican Party. Why can't the progressive do the same to the Democratic Party? Question: the Tea Party. Why can't the do the same thing to the Democratic Party? Why they can't take over it? Because of the money. You see right now, you see that establishment Democrats are trying to push these progressive candidates out. Bakari Sellers has already started a pact to go against Rashida Tlaib. Cori Bush has a tough primary that's coming up. Her office isn't allowed to speak because of the money, because they're going into a party that is bought and paid for, a party that's owned by Wall Street, that's owned by corporations. So even though they don't take corporate money, it doesn't matter. They're going into a party that does. And the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, takes corporate money. That's the problem. That's why they can't take it over. You see how they keep bringing out all these other donors to throw in big money last minute so these progressives will lose their races? That's why. It's corrupt. So if you like that strategy and you want to go with that, then I would say focus on a strategy of getting corporate money out of politics first, and then you can go there. JB, I got it because my doctor suggested it, but only because my doctor suggested it. Ashura, if conservatives are pro-life, what do they say about blacks in prison on death row? Yikes. You guys are coming with all the hits tonight. I'm looking at the comments. Thanks for the super chat, Hella Cook. What do you say to the people afraid to speak up on the injustices because fearing for their life? This seems to account for large apprehension in all people. Well, I mean, that can happen regardless, right? I think it's important that you speak your truth. And yeah, sometimes those things, you may be put in that situation where that may be a possibility, but I think it's important that you speak your truth. I know for me personally, I feel a lot better when I actually say what's on my mind than when I hold it in. Greg Bruce, I wonder what % of people who cite the Bible have actually read a page in the Bible. That's another one. No, it happens. It happens. Sherry says that's why there needs to be separation of church and state. The radicals in the religious realm would like nothing more than to live in theocracy. Yeah, I see that starting to fade away too. Brenda V, thou shalt vote third party and stop voting for Democrats and Republicans. Jimmy Dore 1-5. Oh my God. Guys, I think, is this the comment of the night? Let's all give Brenda a round of applause. I think this is the comment of the night. Thou shalt vote third party and stop voting for Democrats and Republicans. Jimmy Dore 1-5. I love that. That's hilarious. Oh man. Oh boy. Nation said, well done. That's a good one. Oh man. Yeah. So that's my take on that. Like, I don't know what other people do, like what other people put in their body. That's none of my business. I never really cared about that, to be honest. But Karen said, made my day. I'm sorry. That was hilarious, man. I should start doing little things for like comment of the night or something like that. All right, guys. That's all for tonight. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Remember, I switched my schedule, so I'm not live tomorrow night, but I'll be back on Thursday night and Friday night. So fun times. Oh boy, that one's going to be stuck in my head for a bit. I'm not lying. That was a funny comment. But guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you learned something earlier today about public banks. And thanks. You grabbed that one, Eric. Thanks for the super chat. Max Fiend, Justice Coney Barrett argued that there is a domestic shortage of adoptable infants in her leaked opinion, and that language ended up in the actual decision too. There you go. See, like, who cares? Like, why are you just, I'm telling you, they want you to have these kids because they need people to do the labor. All right, guys. Had a great night with you. I think Nick is live on RBN. Go check him out. He has a special guest. I'm not sure if the guest is still on there right now, but I know he had a guest tonight. So go check him out on RBN. Other than that, guys, have a good night. Keep up the fight.